Estrogen dominance looks like women who have an easy time gaining weight, a really difficult time losing weight. They tend to pack on weight around the hips and the butt, and they'll have things like fibroids, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS. Those are all sort of estrogen dominant disorders. And of course, lack of estrogen is going to give you those hot flashes and the night sweats. And progesterone dominant than estrogen dominant. Progesterone dominant is usually like the women that never seem to have a problem with their weight. They're always skinny. Those are usually the progesterone dominant women.
Welcome to the Too Curious MD podcast. I'm Dr. Ali Ahmed.
And I'm Dr. Soraya Khan.
In this podcast, we are asking the unasked questions.
We're physicians applying the lens of narrative medicine, exploring integrative practices and psychedelic treatment in health.
Together with our guests, we weave new learnings from stories, expertise, and the sciences. Let's dive in. Hi, today we're going to be on our podcast called Too Curious MD, where we're going to be talking with Dr. Julia Ward, and she is a compassionate and pioneering physician with over a decade of experience in functional medicine, offering holistic, patient-centered approach to health and wellness. After earning her medical degree from the University of Southern California, yay! I'm in California. I'm in Northern California. She's also a veteran in the U.S. Navy, where she practiced general, urgent, and emergency medicine, both domestically and abroad. She faced her personal challenges in her health that led her to functional medicine. Frustrated by the limitations of conventional care, Dr. Ward embraced a root cause approach, completing a fellowship within the Board of Anti-Aging and Regenerative Medicine in 2016. She has since dedicated her career to empowering patients with knowledge, promoting sustainable lifestyle changes, and integrating cutting-edge science in her practice to address physical and environmental factors impacting health. She's also a devoted wife and a mother of 5. Oh, wow. I want to know more about that. And combines her passion for medicine with a steadfast commitment to improving lives through transformative care. So welcome to Curious MD, where we ask those unasked questions. And I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions today because I'm very curious about the work that you do. But first, I want to know more about you and what was your journey to functional medicine and the care that you provide now?
Absolutely. So I was practicing medicine in like urgent care kind of situations, primary care, and a lot of smaller emergency room kind of settings. And I was getting a little burnt out with that because it was the same sort of things over and over. I felt like I wasn't making much of a difference. And then when I was, I think, about the age of like 45 or so, I started feeling overwhelmingly tired and fatigued. And that was like really my only sign that something hormonally was changing, was just that overwhelming fatigue. And when I went to my GYN doctor, I really didn't get any answers. That, it was clear to me that they didn't have any knowledge about bioidentical hormones. And at that stage, I didn't either. So when I started researching, what are bioidentical hormones and could they maybe help me with this fatigue? And that's when I stumbled onto, well, this is functional medicine. And all of a sudden it just like, oh, well, this makes so much more sense. This is so logical. So that's how I started studying functional medicine and getting into a bioidentical hormone replacement.
I would say I hear that a lot from patients that I treat, especially women who are at that transitional stage, I would say, because it's not just about menopause. It's not just that one time frame. It's like the whole transition.
Right.
And I would say, even as a physician, what was that journey like versus, not knowing the science or not having that background and that training? Tell me more about how that occurred for you as a physician navigating your own health through the systems that you're familiar with, and then how did you then learn your training in functional medicine?
I think it was clear to me when I was speaking with my gynecologist that she didn't have any knowledge of bioidentical hormones. And that just made me more curious to go and look for it. And so when I started researching on the web, basically I would find different organizations, different, kind of teachings about this. And that's kind of how I got into it, just trying to figure out. And at that time, I mean, this was like about 14 years ago or so. There weren't as many online courses as there are now.
Yeah.
But so I just picked one of the major ones, which at the time was A4M, and went with them. And it was really eye-opening. I remember my very first conference on hormones, going there, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're like speaking a whole nother language. Like I've not even heard of, they're talking about all these herbal stuff. They're talking about metabolic pathways. And I was like, wow, this is so foreign. I mean, we didn't learn any of this in medical school.
Yeah. Or some recess in our minds by, metabolic medicine with some biochem class that we had taken.
Yeah.
And I actually remember in medical school, I was fascinated by biochemistry. So I actually remembered that I had made this big diagram, in our time before internet or computers. I had a whole map of all the metabolic pathways because I was just so fascinated by it and had color coded it, looking into my archives of my material for that diagram. And then I found it and I said, wow, actually all those pathways we had studied, and it was just revived, my training in integrative medicine, which actually does explore the same kind of way of treating, but integrating other components like the holistic arts and healing arts that are also seen in other sciences in the Eastern and Western practices of medicine. So, but functional medicine is right down with integrative medicine. That's how I see it. I see it very complementary and very in the practice of medicine that I see with patients. It's very much a component, really digging in deep into the functional health of down to the cellular health. And
Yes.
I'm also curious about your work in health and your practice, particularly for menopause and in that transition, as I said earlier. Tell me more about how you see mental health treatments for women going through the transition stages towards menopause and thereafter.
I always tell women, I mean, the mental health is so key and essential. And if they have some mental health issue that they're not dealing with, then it doesn't matter what I do with hormones or supplements, or, it's just like nothing else is really going to work until we address that mental health issue. So I've always encouraged patients to seek therapy, counselors, what in whatever form is going to be easier for them. So, and long ago, I started offering ketamine IVs in my clinic because I do have an anesthesia background. And so I'm like, well, how hard can this be? And I would do just very low doses, but we get really some remarkable improvements in patients, even after 1 or 2 IVs. It was pretty amazing. Yeah. So
it is. So you have combined, your hormonal treatments and with ketamine treatments. Is that correct?
Yes, and I don't do a lot of them. They're just, for whatever reason, that's not like our emphasis, but we do have them. And then more recently, as I've gotten more into the treating chronic disease, people with like mold and Lyme, I'm always recommending some of these amygdala retraining programs like Primal Trust or the Gupta program or the Annie Hopper. So
I don't know anything about that. Tell me more about what you mean.
So these are programs designed for, people who've had a lot of chronic disease. Maybe they've been sick a long time. They usually have some trauma in their background. And it's sort of like they are permanently stuck in this hyper arousal mode, right? They're in that fight or flight, constant, everything's and it translates down to the cellular level where their immune system is way off balance. They're just in this chronically inflamed state. And until they can kind of get, so now they're misinterpreting, their brain is misinterpreting signals that are just, normal for us, but it's causing a reaction in them. And so, you get a lot of allergies, a lot of chemical sensitivities, EMF sensitivities, that type of a thing. And it's because they're just so, hyper aroused, they're just in that fight or flight. And so these amygdala retraining programs help them to kind of calm the nervous system, if you will. So Yeah, it's been very helpful for these chronically ill patients.
Wow. Tell me more about what you see and what type of hormonal changes occur in menopause, and how does that really affect mood or anxiety or their cognition even? What have you seen in your practice, and how do women come to you?
So usually women who are going through perimenopause or menopause, they're experiencing things like mood swings, anxiety, depression, brain fog is a big one, hot flashes, night sweats, maybe their sleep is thrown off, and they just don't feel like themselves. I had a friend of mine say that she literally felt like she was dying inside, and she couldn't really tell why. And of course, when you go to the traditional doctor or even your GYN, they're just running some blood tests and they're like, oh, your FSH and LH are not elevated. You're still having periods. You're not in menopause. You're fine. Like everything's fine. But something is not right. So, it has to do with the levels of the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and those start fluctuating. And especially as we get into that perimenopausal range, and menopause really can happen anytime from 35 to 55. Everybody's going to be different. And how long you stay in that perimenopausal range it just varies depending on, genetics and lifestyle factors and things like that. So,
I imagine in those fluctuations is where the symptoms emerge, right?
yeah, absolutely. And, some women have more estrogen dominant kind of symptoms. And other people, some women never have a hot flash going through menopause. And so they're like, oh, good, I'm not going through menopause. But they still are lacking those hormones. And it's still affecting things like bone health, cardiovascular health, and even memory. So it's still important to kind of address those.
And that was me. I actually did not get any hot flashes to this date. To this day I have not had any hot flashes. So I don't really have that experience
Yeah.
in my own transition. And I imagine that definitely is a factor, right? It's well known that hot flashes is the sign, and yet
Yeah.
when you're going through it, you don't notice the other symptoms that emerge, right? The sleep issues, the
Yeah.
changes, even the skin changes.
Right.
There's so many in other, I mean, and for our audience, because estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors are everywhere, and
Right.
it's not just in the genital or female organ systems, and it's not. Tell me more about all the different types of symptoms, and why is it that it is so generalized, and so it's so subtle, so it would be almost difficult to differentiate between that and something like colitis or gastric, or sleep
Yeah.
related to something else. How do you differentiate that?
I think it just depends. I mean, that's the beauty of functional and integrative medicine is that you can treat everybody so personalized and individualized and kind of see what's going on. But we definitely have to address the role of digestion and gut health because that does play a huge role in overall health, but especially with hormone regulation as well. So there's like this gut hormone axis, if you will. And so, the microbiome is playing a critical role in metabolizing and regulating hormones, not only estrogen and testosterone, but cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and thyroid hormones. And now if our gut is leaky or if there's problems with our digestion, we're going to have imbalances. Things like estrogen dominance, something called adrenal fatigue, which is not technically correct because the adrenals they're a gland, they're not a muscle, so they don't fatigue out. But when you're stressed for a long period of time, your cortisol is initially like high, but then after a while the brain stops listening to the signals to produce it, and then it falls down low, and then you get kind of this flat line of cortisol, and it's a whole nother set of problems, if you will. So but it's kind of a protective mechanism because too much cortisol over a long period of time is very damaging to the brain, especially in the memory center of the brain. So it's not an entirely bad thing to shut it down, but it does bring on more issues. So
Often tell patients, yeah, your body's actually responding to your situation in a way that supports you. Of course, that itself can become dysfunctional over time. And, how do you address that and how to reverse that aspect of getting back to what it should be doing versus what it's
Right.
trying to do to adjust to a stressful situation, like a toxic level situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned in your work uh, about root cause treatment, and I'm very fascinated by root cause level treatment.
Yeah.
What is your approach to addressing root cause? Tell me more about,
So
how.
yeah, it's basically taking like an overall health assessment of where you are and taking in all kinds of factors. But we start with the gut because so much of our health depends on a healthy gut. And I can tell you from experience, when I first started doing functional medicine and I would just focus on hormones because that's what I first learned. And I would say the majority of patients would get better when I replaced their hormones with bioidentical hormones, but not everyone. And I started to realize that the people who were not improving were usually had some other source of inflammation, like their gut was really off, their diet was really off, that type of a thing. And so until we addressed that and fixed that, nothing else was going to kind of fall into place. So we definitely want to look at gut health, and inflammation in general. If you're having a lot of inflammation, that's a problem. And you want to find out where that's coming from and why you're having that.
How would you address and how would you track where that inflammation is coming from?
So again,
In your
it
life.
just yeah, it just depends. I mean, we just run some standard blood work. I usually run an expanded lipid profile panel that has some inflammatory markers on that. That gives me some good ideas too. But also just from the history, just listening to the patient and what's going on in their life, sometimes you can pick that out from, okay, obviously if somebody's having gut issues, if they're having chronic diarrhea or constipation, or if it's a lot of gas and bloating, like chances are that's a lot of inflammation is coming from there.
Yeah. In your own journey, where you kind of navigated your own treatment by actually pursuing further, studies and certifications, what would you tell women? How can they advocate for themselves for their mental health treatment during menopause or during that perimenopausals?
Well, if they're not getting satisfactory answers from their provider, seek another opinion. If because there's plenty of providers, well, there's plenty of doctors out there, but you have to find somebody that has had that training in either bioidentical hormones or, treating the gut holistically or, different things like that. So if you're not finding that answer, if you feel like you're just getting sort of gaslighted by your provider, then go find a second opinion because they're out there.
Yeah, they definitely are. I mean, I know now, of course, there's so much more material, so much more information
Yeah.
in social media. I mean,
Mhm.
TikTok, for example, a lot of my patients tell me, I found this on TikTok, and what do you think, doctor? And you're like, yeah, let me look at that. So being open, I think your doctor, I've always seen that when I've gone to my doctor, it's like, is my doctor open to kind of other ways of
Yeah.
talking about things? What's their way that they communicate with you? How busy are they? How busy, how distracted,
Yeah.
do they have an interest in you as a human being versus just being a patient or a number
Yeah.
or, just that 15-minute appointment and you're out the door and you get a prescription. I know a lot of patients, a lot of women, the first thing when they go to their doctor, they'll say, oh, I'm feeling really depressed and sad and I don't know what's going on. And and they'll give a good history. Then the doctor will say, okay, I'll just write a prescription for an antidepressant.
Right.
And there's no further, I would say, curiosity in what else is happening or why
Yeah.
would that be. And a lot of times these treatments are just, I mean, I find it funny that in psychiatry, conditions are labeled as symptoms. You're
Mhm.
depressed, so
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
depression, so that's a condition.
Yeah.
You have anxiety, well, that's just a symptom.
Yeah.
That's a symptom of
Right.
something, and it's
Right.
not really the root cause to actually what may be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was going through medical school, I felt like there weren't very many options. especially in psychiatry. It was all like medication management, and it didn't seem like anyone ever got better. And it was sort of depressing. And I think that sort of turned me off to psychiatry. If I was going into medical school now, I might rethink that, just because I feel like there's so many other options with the psychedelics, with genetics, with just all sorts of other things that are just kind of open up possibilities that just wasn't necessarily there before.
Yeah. I will say I had secret curiosity about the brain always. I was always reading on the side. I did my own training in pediatrics and became an academic, did a lot of work in hospital-based care, did a lot of teaching. And then I went into narrative medicine, and narrative medicine was all about, the stories of illness, the creativity, the element of how you can bring that into health, into patients and conditions, and really understand it from a very creative mindset. And I found that now I have really bringing in all of the elements of knowledge, both sciences, both academics, but really observing the brain. The brain is not just a black box. It actually is so much more. It's actually a system. And we know a lot about the heart and the pumping and the fluid and mechanics and the electrophysiology of the heart, but now we can actually look at the brain in the same way,
Yeah.
chemically, electrophysiologically, and or
Yeah.
organically, and its connections to all parts of the body, and each part is communicating to the other, right? It's not just about the brain by itself. It actually is about the whole, gut brain axis and the hormonal axis, as you described, and how all of those systems are really communicating to each other in a very beautiful way. I find it very fascinating. What treatments in both conventional or in functional medicine have you found effective in treating mental health conditions in women's health?
Well, certainly making sure that their gut health is good and that they have their hormones balanced makes a difference. So, using bioidentical hormones to replace that, and making sure that their gut is healthy. And if it's not, testing for what's going on with the gut, and then coming up with a sort of a program to bring it back online and reduce the inflammation there. Because so many of our, as you know, neurotransmitters are produced and regulated in the gut. And so if that is not working well, then nothing else is going to fall into line.
That's correct, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that. Tell me more about how the gut is responsible for a lot of the hormonal health.
Right. So the gut microbiome helps regulate hormone metabolism through specific bacterial strains, particularly the estrobolome, a subset of gut bacteria that influences estrogen processing. So if these bacteria are out of balance, the body may either reabsorb excess estrogen, contributing to estrogen dominance, or they can fail to recycle enough estrogen and lead to deficiencies that is going to impact bone health, mood, and metabolism in general. So beyond estrogen, though, the gut also affects cortisol metabolism, insulin sensitivity, thyroid function. So these are all crucial for overall hormonal balance.
Yeah. And, managing that micro ecosystem, right? And at that level, it's quite complicated, I would say, unless you know what actually the gut biome looks like. It's hard to know, what the ecosystem is really, where the balance is.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. So I imagine you'd have to have more testing. And how would you explain that to patients?
Yeah, so we'll often do a stool test on patients where it's a take-home test, and it's either a 1-day or a 3-day. They'll put some stool samples in little tubes, send that off to the lab, and then that gets a whole sort of DNA analysis of not only what is there as far as the gut bacteria, but also inflammatory markers and markers of digestion, things like that, to see, like, are you breaking down your food well enough, or maybe you don't have enough gut acid. And then it's looking at things like short chain fatty acids, which are like part of the food that feeds the colon cells, and we want to have certain sort of keystone species there that are present. And sometimes people are missing those, and that can really result in a lot of inflammation and just imbalance in general.
I've heard about the four-gut protocol, and that's kind of the process that I actually implement with treatments. What is your process? Is it similar where you kind of address
Yeah.
that four
Look,
protocol?
yeah, look at what the stool test showed, and then, okay, well, do we need to kill off anything that shouldn't be there? That's, like the first step. And then we're going to repopulate it with good bacteria. And then we're going to maybe give you some prebiotics to help support that, and maybe some immunoglobulins to help stop that leaky gut. And we might also do a food allergy and sensitivity test that I usually wait a little bit until somebody's down the line in detox, because if we do that food allergy and sensitivity test right at the beginning of everything, they're like lighting up for everything, because if their gut is really leaky, they're going to react to a lot of foods. And then it becomes overwhelming, like, well, I can't eat anything, so forget it. It's like overwhelm. So I usually wait till they've done a little bit of a detox, because there's low-hanging fruit, right? There's stuff that we know is going to cause inflammation in the gut, like gluten, right? Like, I know that that's going to cause a lot of inflammation. So let's just take out gluten for a while. And for a lot of people, they'll get significantly better just with that. But the food allergy and sensitivity test is more like a fine-tuning after we've taken out some really inflammatory stuff.
And that's a good point, exactly. I mean, the leaky gut, the cross transfer of, large proteins, across that barrier, and the sensitivity that does develop. I often find patients coming in the other way, where they're having a lot more allergies and, sensitivities to so many things. And then the first thing we were trained in conventionally is like, okay, let's do an allergy test. And of course, without really addressing why.
Yeah.
Why are they being sensitized to this?
Right.
I think, so that question, kind of reversing the end of that, is where I find, we weren't taught in medical school, we were not taught that, oh yeah, look at try to find that why, why, don't stop that. Don't ask. I mean, we're always taking the surface level symptoms, right? And trying
Exactly.
to eradicate those symptoms, but not really looking at the source of where that is coming.
Yeah, exactly.
I often get patients who have a history of breast cancer, whether they're estrogen or receptor positive, positive cancers, and then having them on hormone replacement is often very tricky. And I know in conventional medicine that would be a contraindication that I would really avoid doing any hormone replacement. What is your approach there for?
Yeah, I'm probably a little more on the edge of that one, because if somebody has breast cancer, or they had breast cancer recently, but they're just miserable because they have no hormones on board, and they're like, my quality of life is horrendous, I will still do testosterone therapy alone. I won't do any estrogen or progesterone, but I'll do testosterone therapy, because that will boost up their testosterone levels to super physiologic, but it makes them feel so much better. They have energy, they can sleep. Testosterone is a natural anti-inflammatory. It helps a lot with sleep. So just giving them testosterone can be a huge game changer. And there have been some studies showing the anti-cancer properties of testosterone. So, but it's definitely very much a personal choice. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, and I know that science is really going to change, especially if we can look at, more genetics around causation, and even some of the epigenetic markers for sometimes those conditions, those inflammatory conditions. And I think that is important for patients to know that the science is ongoing. And there's still a little more. There are providers who I suggest to, who are specialized in integrative or functional medicine, who do treat women with hormone replacement, bioidentical hormone replacement, and knowing which type and which the best way to manage that is more of a specialty, I would say, even in functional medicine. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, definitely. It would be like more of a specialty thing, where people are just focused on that one thing. I don't have very many breast cancer patients, but there are definitely a few.
Yeah. I do a lot of mental health treatments with ketamine, and as well as combining that with integrative medicine, and find that the patients that are coming to me are really coming with that mindset of, I want to treat my mental health first, and that their history is also there, but it's more of in the background. And I think that, when we finally do treat, their mental health, and they're not depressed, and then they're able to be more functional, they're able to think more clear, they're able to have more energy, they feel more motivated for change, even with weight loss. I can imagine, that's a whole nother field as well in medicine, but it's such an important part of mental health.
Yes.
And even addressing that, the motivation that comes right after they feel mentally better, is so much of a big factor in how they
Yes.
see themselves and their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Some of the questions around menopause, and I think, it's also depression around premenstrual or cycle.
Yeah.
And you mentioned also estrogen dominance and progesterone dominance too, right? Or even low progesterone. There's so many. How do you assess, what are some of the symptoms, I guess, for our audience, to help them determine where their imbalance is?
Yeah. So estrogen dominance looks like women who have an easy time gaining weight, a really difficult time losing weight. They tend to pack on weight around the hips and the butt, and they'll have things like fibroids, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS. Those are all sort of estrogen dominant disorders. And of course, lack of estrogen is going to give you those hot flashes and the night sweats. And progesterone dominant than estrogen dominant. Progesterone dominant is usually like the women that never seem to have a problem with their weight. They're always skinny. Those are usually the progesterone dominant women. So, but you can definitely go overboard with progesterone. I've seen a lot of women who've come to me and they said, "Oh, I got this progesterone cream off of Amazon, and I've been using a lot of it, and it can actually cause, a lot of symptoms that you would associate with, well, just weirdness, like hair loss and insomnia and things like that." So it's like there's a balance there.
Right.
Too much, too little are going to give you different symptoms.
Yeah, and it's such a delicate balance too, because it does cycle, right?
Yes.
That whole hormonal process is cycling,
Right.
where there is a high amount of estrogen at the early part, and then it drops, and then the
Yeah.
progesterone dominates, and so you have to be able to manage through the whole cycle, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what makes perimenopause even more challenging, because it's like you're trying to balance a system that's in constant flux. And so it's
Yeah.
almost easier to treat somebody who's, far postmenopausal, like they're stable. Whatever we give them, that's what they have on board, versus somebody who's perimenopausal. They're still making some of their own hormones, and it's throwing off the system. So
Yeah. A lot of OB and gynecologists will say they're not going to necessarily treat postmenopausal beyond a certain number of years of not having hormone replacement. What is your approach, and what are your thoughts there?
yeah, I don't like to put a time limit on people, because I really feel like balancing your hormones is like the keystone of any anti-aging program. Like if you want to age gracefully, you're going to have your hormones balanced at youthful levels. And if you take away those hormones because you say, "Oh, well, look, you're, 5, 10 years beyond menopause," then you're just accelerating the aging process. And like, who wants to accelerate their aging process? So I don't think that there should be a time limit. I think it's, of course it's personal. If you just decide I'm done, I don't want to use them anymore, that's totally up to you. But I don't think that there's necessarily a medical reason for stopping these.
Yeah. Would you say there's a difference between how women are treated in healthcare versus men treating in healthcare for the same reasons of hormonal imbalance?
Yeah, it's been so long since I've been in traditional medicine, like, that I would see that. I haven't seen that type of behavior in a while. So, but there always does seem to be more of an emphasis on, if men want their testosterone for life, nobody's going to say anything, right?
Right. I have a question also about endocrine disruptors and, the exposure that we have now more than ever, I think, in everything, right? Endocrine disruptors exist in everything, microplastics in the, makeup products and topical
Yeah.
treatments and things that aren't even FDA cleared or approved. It's such a challenge. And I think it's more of a challenge I see in the younger age population, and the impact it has on their mental health. Endocrine
Yeah.
disruptors are, even birth control, you would consider it
Oh,
as a disruptor. Essentially,
yeah.
that's kind of what it is.
Yeah. I remember when I was on the birth control pill back in college and I got depressed from it. I mean,
Yeah.
it made a huge difference. But I just did a 5-part series on reducing your everyday toxic burden, and I talk about things like getting plastics out of the kitchen, what, ingredients to look for in your personal care products and things like that, because you're right, there are so many endocrine disruptors out there. And there are some little things that you can do to kind of just lower your daily toxic burden. So,
What would that be for our audience? I'd love to know more.
I mean, like in the kitchen, for me, like, okay, I used to have these pots and pans that were like Teflon, but they were old. And so they're all scratched up, and so that was a big source of getting chemicals in our food. And I just didn't even think about it. And so I immediately went and replaced pots and pans with newer, stainless steel or, surfaces that are not going to leach chemicals into the food. Or even just simple things like replacing our cutting boards. We used to have these plastic cutting boards and replace them with some wooden ones. So, we're not getting the microplastics that way. And then storing our foods in glass containers now instead of plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the time we used to warm things in the microwave with plastic.
Yeah. And even now, like we'll get lunch brought in from, say, a nutraceutical rep, and they come in plastic containers. And if it's been sitting around, the immediate thing is just like to throw it in the microwave and warm it up. And now I'm like, no, we got to put it in a different, a different dish.
Some people aren't even aware of, aren't even aware of the Teflon coated, kitchen materials as a source as it being endocrine disruptor. I
Yeah.
can tell you, it's not a well-known fact, and maybe it should be. It would definitely change the industry, right?
Yeah.
And with that knowledge, and I think it is important. And I think what it reminds us that we're going back to the basics, really going back to the basics. I mean, plastic, the invention of plastic. I'm very curious about, the world without plastic. What would that really look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even more plastic until the 50s.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I
And now we're
was a chemical engineer. I was a chemical engineer, and we actually had a polymer science was one of our courses, and the whole history of polymer science really started then, and it was such a technological advance at that time when plastics became introduced. It changed the way we live, and now we're going back to trying to think how can we not rely on plastics and not and really remove that from our daily
right.
exposure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me more about what you would advise for patients on makeup or products there.
So I have to look and see, but I certainly am trying to look for more products that are natural or they have less some of these ingredients in them that can be endocrine disruptors. And certainly I've stopped using things like fragrances because those do contain phthalates, which are known endocrine disruptors. So I'm just gonna
Oh,
not my usual way. Yeah, all perfumes have it in them.
back to essential oils.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I found an app actually that you can use on as a barcode.
Oh yeah.
Yuka app. Have you heard of that?
No.
Maybe I should be promoting there.
There-
It's Yuka. It's called YUKA. Has a K
Okay.
on it. It's a really cool app on your phone. And when I go to Costco or when I go to the grocery store, sometimes I'll just scan the barcode and it tells you everything that's in there, and it gives you kind of a number rating of
Okay.
exposures and alternatives that you can use instead.
Yeah.
Or
I know of another app called like Clear and then YA, and a similar thing where you can scan things and it's going to tell you if it,
and I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Because you're right, there's so many products and there's so many things that we don't even know the names of, can't even pronounce half of them, and yet they are present for whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just in like the food packaging alone, this is why, it's better to get food in glass jars versus cans because of all the BPA in the cans. And in certain packaging, that just has a lot of that. Anything that's like grease proof that has those BPAs in there. Yeah,
Well, the list goes on.
it does. Yeah.
What is it like for you when you go to the grocery store?
Well, I try to shop on the periphery, of the fresh foods and, frozen foods and dairy, the cold sections and things like that. I try to
That's
avoid
right.
the middle.
That's
Yeah.
right. And I do the same exact thing. I avoid the middle. I never even go in the middle, hardly now. And
Yeah.
I'm surprised that I don't really need to go in the middle. It's like
Yeah.
all of the foods that are there really are not even, I don't even need them,
Yeah.
'cause you think you need them until you realize you don't.
Right.
And I often tell patients, yeah, go on the outside.
Yeah.
Where anything that comes from the ground or can be, that would decay,
Exactly.
then that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. We're always promoting, a whole, clean, unprocessed foods as the majority of your diet, because the more processed foods you have, the worse. It's like the worse your health is going to be. And there's so much sugar in those processed foods that you just don't even realize.
Yeah, which is also very inflammatory.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you have five kids.
5 kids. Yeah.
What's their health approach like?
Yeah, I think they're all pretty healthy. So I can't complain, but I was not the perfect mom by any sense. Like I was not shopping organic and, I was in basic survival mode for when the kids were younger. So, I didn't even really start diving into studying toxins and what's out there until just recently because, when you're in that survival mode and you're just trying to get dinner on the table, you're like, I don't really care if it's organic or not. I just got to get it on the table.
And that's a lot of people's story too. I mean, it's really the way we're living in that fast food lifestyle
Yeah.
where access is readily available. And the epigenetic factor that involves comes up with that. I mean, I know that there are markers for, where for starved gut, where in some places in the world. I worked overseas, and the food was so much different. And then coming to the United States, the food is very different. It tastes different. It feels different.
Hmm.
The sweetness factor is higher.
Hmm.
And how your body metabolizes that is very different.
Yeah.
And so the risk factors for cancer,
Hmm.
diabetes, cardiovascular illness increases dramatically just by your migration,
Yeah.
just by
Yeah.
to one country.
Absolutely. Your whole gut microbiome changes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And then, but we're living here, right? So your body kind of it tries to adjust for you in that weird way, but it definitely has an impact on your health. And I wish they would teach this in medical school as well. You know,
Yeah.
what, where are you from? What's your history like? What's your story? How do you live? And your generational story. Correct. I
Right.
mean, it's more about, we talk about family history, but really we don't really get the generational history, the you know the trauma history. We're not trauma
Mm.
informed in the
Yeah.
way we question or learn about our patients. And I think that's such an important factor to
Yeah.
somebody's health, is knowing, you know, how they live. And I imagine that's something similar for you too with your patients.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely, you need to ask about what they're eating, when they're eating, the habits and all that kind of stuff, because that just makes a huge impact for overall health, but and especially weight loss. I get a lot of women who are overweight and they're like, well, I'm eating once a day or twice a day. I'm like, well, that's a problem. It's, under eating can be just as bad as overeating, because when you're under eating, you're not getting enough protein in, you're burning your muscle mass, your resting metabolism goes down, and then your mitochondria, which is the little batteries inside your cells, are super efficient at dealing with adjustments to how much energy they're being given. So if you decrease your calories, all of a sudden they become more efficient and you're not necessarily losing weight. So, yeah.
Well, as we close, I'd like to ask the question about what would be your recommendation for a woman who is in perimenopause, supplements, way of life to impact, the mental health and their transition to menopause.
So I would say, it's really important to eat, clean, healthy diet. The less sugar, the better. In fact, I had one lady who was having horrible hot flashes, and she just went sugar-free. She just cold turkey went sugar-free, and her hot flashes and night sweats went away. So, you can really make that big change just by eating a clean, healthy diet and reducing the amount of what we call oxidative stress on the body. But again, exercise is a huge one too. And you don't necessarily have to jump into hormone replacement right away. There are some herbal supplements that can kind of help reduce that oxidative stress. There's, a variety of different things depending on what the symptoms are. So, but it's, eating a clean, healthy diet, getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep, and dealing with your stress. And I think women in general tend to ignore themselves and their needs because we're so used to taking care of others that it's like we feel guilty for spending any time or money on ourselves. But we forget that if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to have that to give to the people that are depending on us. So, yeah.
That's so true. I mean, you mentioned sleep. I ask now every patient about sleep, which I didn't used to. What's their sleep history like? How do they approach sleep? What's their sleep? Do they even have a sleep hygiene? What are they doing with their
Right.
technology, devices and how they can even use trackers and, really look at sleep in a very broad way, both objectively and subjectively. I make every patient as a condition of treatment to say, well, every morning you're going to step out from 7 to 9 a.m. and you're going to look at the sky without any barriers or glasses or any.
Yeah.
You're going to step outside and you're going to look at the sky, not the sun, just look at the sky, just bring light into your eyes and meditate, or just take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long, and you'll notice a difference right away. You'll notice how your body wakes up, feel your body go, wow, I'm awake now.
Yeah. That's a great recommendation. Yeah. I love that.
And the other recommendation is, and at night, do the same exact thing, but the opposite. Go inside, right? 2 hours before you go to sleep, just start to turn things down. Turn all devices off, turn lights down, just kind of just slow things out and really take time for yourself. That's your time.
Yeah.
If you want to just take a moisturizer and just, especially with women, just like massage your skin and just notice your skin and just love yourself. And just look at yourself and say, hey, I love you. You'll feel it in your body. You'll feel that emotion of love in your body.
That's awesome.
Your cells will feel it. They'll know that, oh, my mom, me, I love myself. I love my heart. Thank you, heart. Thank you for everything you did today. Thank you, really just stay very present with your body and show gratitude.
Yeah.
Because it shows up. And the next morning, when you comb your hair, just take time in that last beginning part of your day. That's your time, your ritual, put on music, just really kind of enjoy the last day.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, there's little things that we're going back.
Yeah, little things. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was wonderful to talk to you, Julia.
Thank you very much.
So, I've got so many more questions, and I'm sure I hope we meet again and do another podcast together. This is such a good way of us learning about each other's work. It's our way of understanding community of healthcare providers out there who are doing the same thing. You're in Houston, Texas. How would somebody find you on the internet? How would people look for you?
My website is drjuliaward.com. So just JULIAWARD.com. And I'm in Sugarland, Texas, which is just outside of Houston.
Yeah. Do you have a telehealth practice, or you're outside of this?
I just see Texas patients right now.
Well, thank you. And I'm so grateful for you to be here in our podcast, and enjoy talking to you some more.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was so much fun.
Thanks for joining us on the Too Curious MD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.